They didn't grow up with constant supervision. They grew up with a key around their neck, under their shirt, and silence waiting at home. This wasn't rebellion. This was Generation X. Gen X wasn't shaped by slogans. They weren't handed a mission. They were handed responsibility earlier than anyone noticed. And that changed everything. Because while other generations were taught what to believe, Gen X learned something more dangerous, that adults didn't always know what they were doing. And once you see that, you never unsee it. Picture this. The bus pulls away. The house is quiet. No texts, no calls, no check-ins. Just a note on the counter. Be back later. Make yourself something. This wasn't rare. This was normal. So Gen X learned independence before permission, problem-solving before reassurance, self-trust before validation. Not because they wanted freedom, because no one was home to manage it. They grew up during a strange moment. Authority still demanded respect, but respect was quietly falling apart, and Gen X noticed. The television never turned off. Wars played live. Scandals exposed leaders. Promises unraveled in real time. Adults lost credibility on screen. Gen X was watching. This is where the skepticism formed. Not rebellion, not rage, just a quiet thought. Yeah, I don't fully buy this. Gen X didn't burn the system down. They simply stopped believing the sales pitch. Institutions weren't sacred. Promises weren't permanent, and trust was conditional. That's why Gen X treats work differently. They don't believe companies are family. They don't expect loyalty. They build security themselves and assume it can disappear anytime. This is also why their humor hits different. Dry, dark, uncomfortably honest. Sarcasm wasn't negativity. It was compression, a shortcut for saying, I see the absurdity, let's not pretend. Gen X doesn't overshare, not because they're closed off, but because no one asked when it mattered. Feelings were handled privately. Problems were handled alone. So emotional intelligence developed internally, not performatively. They learned to sit with feelings, not broadcast them. Gen X became the middle child of generations. Boomers before them, loud and idealistic. Millennials after, expressive and connected. Gen X learned to exist without the spotlight. They don't crave attention. They're comfortable being overlooked. But invisibility leaves marks, and they rarely talk about it. Here's what people miss. Gen X isn't detached. They're calibrated. They learned early, expect change, prepare quietly, adjust fast. That's why they're calm in chaos. They've already lived through transformation. Analog to digital, Cold War to uncertainty, jobs to layoffs. Change doesn't shock them. It confirms what they already knew. Gen X loves deeply, but practically. They don't confuse intensity with commitment. They value consistency over fireworks. Because they watched permanence dissolve growing up. When Gen X became parents, something shifted. They remembered the empty houses, so they showed up. They listened. They tried to be present, even if they weren't perfect. Gen X doesn't chase trends. They lived before algorithms. Identity wasn't curated, it was discovered. They trust their internal compass, even when it points somewhere unpopular. What Gen X fears most isn't failure, it's dependence, being trapped, losing autonomy, because independence wasn't a luxury, it was survival. They don't want to be rescued, they want to be capable. They don't want applause, they want control over their own lives. Gen X doesn't call themselves resilient. They don't brand it. They just keep moving, through layoffs, through shifts, through being skipped in generational conversations. They became translators between analog and digital, between old systems and new realities. They adapted without asking for credit. Gen X won't trend. They won't be mythologized loudly. But when systems break, they're often the ones holding things together. Calm, skeptical, practical, unimpressed by chaos, still standing. Gen X didn't grow up believing the world would save them. They grew up believing if something needs to be handled, I'll handle it. They don't ask to be understood. They don't demand recognition. But if you listen closely, you'll hear a generation that learned early. Trust yourself, question authority, and never wait for permission to survive.